Radio crackled to life at 4:37 a.m., cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a knife through silk. Staff Sergeant Maya Williams jerked awake in her bunk aboard the USS Tempest, her hand instinctively reaching for the communication device clipped to her vest. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Control to Phoenix team. We have a situation developing in Sector 7. 3 of our boys went dark approximately 2 hours ago during reconnaissance mission Alpha 7. Last known position coordinates follow. Maya rolled out of her narrow bunk, her feet hitting the cold metal floor of the destroyer's crew quarters. At 28 years old, she had spent 6 years in the Navy, working her way up from a basic communications specialist to one of the most trusted search and rescue coordinators in the Pacific Fleet. Her colleagues called her the Ghost Walker because of her ability to slip into hostile territory undetected and bring people home. The morning briefing painted a grim picture. 3 Navy SEALs from Team Bravo had been conducting a surveillance mission on a small island chain, roughly 40 nautical miles from their current position. The mission was supposed to be routine: gather intelligence on suspected enemy weapon stockpiles and report back before sunrise. But at 2:17 a.m., their communications went silent. No distress signal, no emergency beacon, nothing. Commander Jake Harrison, a weathered veteran with 22 years of service, spread the tactical maps across the briefing room table. His weathered hands traced the coordinates as he spoke to the assembled rescue team. Intelligence suggests the island has been fortified recently. Satellite imagery shows increased activity over the past week. We're looking at potentially 15 to 20 hostiles, armed and prepared for company. The terrain is rough, dense jungle covering most of the interior with rocky cliffs along the northern coastline. Maya studied the photographs spread before her. The target island was roughly 3 miles long and 1 mile wide, shaped like a crescent moon with steep cliffs on one side and a narrow beach on the other. Dark green vegetation covered most of the landmass, creating perfect cover for both the missing SEALs and their potential captors. "What's the extraction window?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "We need those men back before nightfall," Harrison replied. "Weather reports indicate a major storm system moving in from the east. If we don't get them out by sunset, we'll lose our window for at least 72 hours. The rescue team consisted of Maya and 5 other specialists. Petty Officer First Class Robert Stone would handle demolitions and heavy weapons. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Jennifer Park would provide medical support. Electronics Technician Third Class Marcus Thompson would manage communications and electronic warfare. Boatswain's Mate Second Class Luis Garcia would pilot their insertion craft. Finally, Master-at-Arms First Class Amanda Foster would serve as their security specialist. At 6:15 a.m., they loaded into a rigid-hull inflatable boat designed for stealth operations. The craft was painted matte black and equipped with a nearly silent electric motor for the final approach. Maya checked her equipment one final time: night vision goggles, tactical radio, first aid kit, climbing gear, and her sidearm. She carried minimal offensive weapons, preferring to rely on stealth and cunning rather than firepower. The journey to the target island took 97 minutes through choppy seas. Maya used the time to review the mission parameters and study the terrain maps. The missing SEALs were identified as Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Brooks, Petty Officer Third Class Kevin Nash, and Seaman First Class Danny Wright. All 3 were experienced operators with multiple deployments under their belts. As they approached the island, Maya could see smoke rising from somewhere in the interior. Her stomach clenched. Smoke could mean anything from a cooking fire to a signal flare to something much worse. Garcia cut the motor when they were still half a mile from shore, and the team paddled the remaining distance using silent strokes. The beach was empty when they reached it at 8:41 a.m. Maya led the team up from the waterline, moving in a tactical formation through the sparse vegetation at the jungle's edge. The air was thick with humidity and the sounds of tropical birds calling from the canopy above. Thompson deployed his electronic surveillance equipment, scanning for radio signals or electronic signatures that might indicate the location of either their missing personnel or enemy forces. After 20 minutes of careful monitoring, he detected intermittent radio chatter coming from somewhere in the island's interior. I'm picking up communications roughly 1.2 kilometers northeast of our position, Thompson whispered into his throat microphone. Signal strength suggests they're operating from an elevated position, probably one of those rocky outcroppings we saw in the satellite photos. Maya made the decision to split the team. Foster and Stone would circle around to approach the enemy position from the north, while she, Park, Garcia, and Thompson would advance directly through the jungle. The plan was simple: locate the missing seals and extract them with minimal engagement if possible. The jungle was denser than the satellite imagery had suggested. Thick vines hung between massive trees, creating a green tunnel that blocked most of the morning sunlight. Maya led her team forward using hand signals, stopping every few minutes to listen for sounds that didn't belong to the natural environment. At 10:23 a.m., they found the first sign of the missing seals. A torn piece of camouflage fabric hung from a thorn bush approximately 50 meters from what appeared to be a well-used trail. Maya examined the fabric carefully. It was definitely from a U.S. Navy uniform, and the tear pattern suggested it had been caught during rapid movement rather than careful navigation. Thompson's equipment detected stronger radio signals as they moved deeper into the jungle. The communications chatter was becoming more frequent, and he was able to determine that the enemy forces were using older radio equipment with poor encryption. Through careful monitoring, he learned that the hostiles had indeed captured 3 American soldiers and were holding them in a fortified position. The trail led steadily upward through increasingly difficult terrain. Maya's team had to use climbing equipment to navigate several steep sections, where the path wound between large boulders and fallen trees. At 11:57 a.m., they reached a vantage point that allowed them to observe the enemy compound. The hostiles had constructed a defensive position on a rocky plateau overlooking the jungle below. Maya counted 12 individuals moving around the compound, all carrying automatic weapons. The position was well chosen for defense: steep approaches on 3 sides and a commanding view of the surrounding area. However, the same features that made it defensible also made it isolated. Through her binoculars, Maya could see 3 figures bound and seated near what appeared to be a communication station. Even at distance, she could tell from their uniforms and posture that these were likely the missing SEALs. They appeared to be alive and conscious, though she couldn't determine their physical condition. Foster's voice crackled through Maya's earpiece at 12:31 p.m. Phoenix Lead, this is Wolf Team. We're in position on the North Ridge. I count 14 hostiles total, plus 3 prisoners. The prisoners appear mobile but restrained. Maya acknowledged the report and began formulating an extraction plan. The enemy position was too well fortified for a direct assault, especially with their limited numbers and the need to protect the captured SEALs. Instead, she decided on a diversion tactic that would draw most of the hostiles away from the prisoners. Wolf Team, can you create a distraction on the north side of the compound at 1400 hours? Make it look like a probe by a larger force. Phoenix Team will use the diversion to extract the prisoners from the south side. Copy that. Phoenix Lead. We'll give you fireworks at 1400. Maya's team spent the next hour moving into position. The approach from the south required them to climb down into a ravine and then scale the cliff face directly below the enemy compound. It was dangerous work, made more difficult by the need for absolute silence. Garcia proved invaluable during the climb, using his maritime expertise to secure ropes and anchors that would support the team's weight during both the ascent and the eventual extraction. Park carried additional medical supplies, preparing for the possibility that the rescued SEALs might need immediate treatment. At exactly 1400 hours, explosions and gunfire erupted from the northern side of the compound. Foster and Stone had rigged charges to simulate incoming mortar rounds, while using automatic weapons to create the impression of a sustained assault. Maya watched through her binoculars as most of the enemy fighters rushed to defensive positions facing north, leaving only 3 guards near the prisoners. Maya's team moved swiftly up the cliff face, using the noise of the simulated battle to mask any sounds they made. Thompson had jammed the enemy's radio communications, preventing them from coordinating their response to the apparent attack. By 1417, Maya and her team were over the compound's southern perimeter. The 3 remaining guards were focused entirely on the battle developing to their north. Maya approached the first guard silently, using a technique she'd learned during specialized training to render him unconscious without alerting his companions. Garcia and Thompson handled the other two guards with similar efficiency. The captured SEALs were in better condition than Maya had dared hope. Brooks had a superficial wound on his left arm. Nash showed signs of dehydration and minor cuts from his initial capture, and Wright appeared largely unharmed, though exhausted. All three were conscious and alert. "Navy rescue," Maya whispered as she cut Brooks' restraints. "We're getting you out of here." Brooks nodded, his voice hoarse but strong. "There are 16 hostiles total. They've got heavy weapons cached in the main bunker. Radio equipment is Soviet-era but functional." Maya appreciated the intelligence briefing even as she worked to free the other two SEALs. Park immediately began assessing their medical condition, while Thompson gathered any intelligence materials that might prove valuable. The simulated battle continued to rage on the northern perimeter, but Maya knew they had only minutes before the enemy realized the true nature of the attack. She signaled Garcia to prepare the extraction ropes while she helped the rescued SEALs prepare for the descent. At 14:29, Maya's radio crackled with Foster's voice. "Phoenix lead, they're starting to figure out our game. You need to move now. Copy, Wolf Team. Beginning extraction." The descent down the cliff face was treacherous with 3 additional personnel who were weakened from their captivity. Brooks insisted he could manage the climb on his own, but Nash required assistance from Garcia due to his dehydration. Wright was steady enough to follow Thompson down the ropes. Maya went last, ensuring that all her people were safely away from the compound before beginning her own descent. As she rappelled down the cliff face, she could hear shouts from above as the enemy fighters discovered their missing prisoners. Gunfire began to crack overhead, but the angle of the cliff protected the descending Americans from direct fire. The team regrouped at the bottom of the ravine at 14:47. Maya quickly assessed their situation. 6 team members plus 3 rescued SEALs, approximately 3 kilometers from their extraction point, with 16 hostile fighters likely pursuing them through terrain that favored the defenders. Foster and Stone rejoined the group at 15:03, bringing reports of increased enemy activity. The hostiles had abandoned their defensive positions and were organizing search teams to pursue the rescue party. Maya made the decision to take a longer but safer route back to the beach, avoiding the main trails where they might encounter enemy patrols. The journey through the jungle was exhausting. Nash required frequent rest stops, and Wright, despite his apparent good health, was showing signs of heat exhaustion as the afternoon wore on. Park monitored both men closely while distributing water and energy supplements from her medical kit. At 16:25, Thompson detected radio chatter indicating that enemy search teams had found their trail. The hostiles were moving systematically through the jungle, using their knowledge of the terrain to close the distance between themselves and the fleeing Americans. Maya pushed the pace, knowing that reaching the beach before dark was critical to their survival. The storm system Commander Harrison had mentioned was becoming visible on the horizon, as dark clouds building over the eastern sea. If they were caught on the island when the weather hit, their extraction would be delayed indefinitely. The sound of pursuit grew closer as the afternoon progressed. At 17:09, Stone reported visual contact with enemy fighters approximately 400 meters behind their position. Maya ordered her team to increase their pace while Foster prepared defensive positions in case they were overtaken. The jungle began to thin as they approached the coastal area. Maya could smell salt air and hear the sound of waves breaking against the shore, but she could also hear voices calling behind them in a foreign language, coordinating the search effort that was rapidly closing in on their position. At 17:38, they reached the beach where Garcia had concealed their extraction boat. Maya's heart sank when she saw that the tide had gone out significantly since their morning insertion, leaving the boat stranded nearly 50 meters from the waterline. Garcia and Thompson began dragging the heavy inflatable toward the surf, while Maya organized a defensive perimeter. Foster and Stone took positions at the tree line, preparing to hold off any pursuit while the boat was prepared for departure. The first enemy fighters emerged from the jungle at 17:51. Foster's rifle cracked as she engaged targets at maximum range, forcing the hostiles to take cover and buying precious time for the extraction. Stone provided covering fire with his automatic weapon, while Maya helped load the rescued SEALs into the boat. Nash was barely conscious from heat exhaustion and dehydration. Park had established an IV line and was monitoring his vital signs as Garcia finally got the boat's engine started. Wright was alert but weak, helping as much as he could with the loading process. Brooks, despite his arm wound, insisted on taking a defensive position to help cover their withdrawal. The enemy fighters began advancing in organized groups, using covering fire to move closer to the beach. Maya could see at least 8 individuals moving through the sparse vegetation at the jungle's edge, with more voices indicating additional forces still approaching through the trees. At 18:07, Garcia got the boat into water deep enough to support their weight. Maya ordered her team to begin boarding while Foster and Stone maintained covering fire from positions near the waterline. The engine noise would certainly attract attention, but they were committed to the water extraction at this point. Enemy fire began striking the water around the boat as Maya helped the last of the rescued SEALs aboard. A bullet punched through the boat's side near the waterline, and Thompson immediately applied an emergency patch, while Garcia pushed the throttle to maximum power. Foster was the last person to board, wading into waist-deep surf while continuing to return fire at the pursuing hostiles. Stone provided covering fire from his position in the boat until Foster was safely aboard. As Garcia accelerated away from the beach, Maya could see enemy fighters reaching the water's edge, their weapons flashing as they continued firing at the departing boat. The storm system that had been building on the horizon was moving faster than predicted. By 1823, the first raindrops were falling as winds began to pick up significantly. Garcia fought to maintain course as waves started building around their small craft. Nash's condition was deteriorating. Park worked frantically to stabilize him as the boat pitched and rolled in increasingly rough seas. Wright was helping as much as his weakened condition allowed, while Brooks maintained watch for enemy pursuit craft despite his injured arm. At 1849, Maya established radio contact with the USS Tempest. Commander Harrison's voice was tense as he acknowledged their successful rescue and requested immediate medical preparation for the recovered personnel. The storm was forcing the destroyer to alter course to maintain sea room, which would extend their journey time significantly. The ride back to the ship became a nightmare of mountainous waves and driving rain. Garcia demonstrated exceptional seamanship as he navigated the storm conditions, but the small boat was being pushed to its limits. Water was coming over the bow regularly, and everyone aboard was soaked and cold despite the tropical climate. Nash lost consciousness at 1914. Park was performing CPR while being thrown around the pitching boat, her medical equipment scattered by the violent motion. Maya held Nash steady while Park worked, praying that they could keep him alive until reaching proper medical facilities. The lights of the USS Tempest appeared through the storm at 1937. Getting alongside the destroyer in the heavy seas required exceptional skill from both Garcia and the ship's crew. Maya had never been so grateful to see the ship's boat davits lowering to lift their battered craft from the water. Nash was unconscious but breathing when they finally reached the ship's medical bay at 1952. The ship's doctor immediately took over his care while Park provided a detailed medical briefing. Wright and Brooks were treated for dehydration, exhaustion, and minor injuries, but both were expected to make full recoveries. Maya stood on the destroyer's bridge at 2021, watching the storm rage over the island where they had spent the day fighting for their lives. Commander Harrison joined her, offering a cup of coffee that she accepted gratefully. "Outstanding work today, Williams. Your people performed like pros under impossible conditions." Maya nodded, too tired to feel much satisfaction yet. She was thinking about Nash fighting for his life in the medical bay below, about the enemy fighters they had left behind, about all the things that could have gone wrong during the mission. At 23:47, the ship's doctor reported that Nash had stabilized and would survive. Maya finally allowed herself to feel the relief that had been building since the morning radio call. 3 SEALs had gone into that island, and 3 SEALs were coming home alive. Later, as Maya finally settled into her bunk at 1:32 a.m., she reflected on the day's events. She had started the morning as just another Navy communications specialist responding to a routine rescue call. By nightfall, she had led a combat mission into hostile territory and brought home 3 American servicemen who would have died without intervention. The radio on her nightstand crackled softly with routine communications traffic. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, Maya Williams closed her eyes knowing that somewhere on this ship, 3 Navy SEALs were sleeping safely in their bunks, because she and her team had refused to leave anyone behind. The storm continued to rage outside, But inside the USS Tempest, all hands were accounted for. The mission that had begun with 3 men listed as missing in action had ended with all personnel safely recovered. In the dangerous world of military operations, successful outcomes like this were never guaranteed, but they made all the risks worthwhile. Maya's last thought before sleep took her was a simple one. Tomorrow morning, Tyler Brooks, Kevin Nash, and Danny Wright would wake up alive, and that made everything else worthwhile. The woman who had been pronounced KIA at dawn had indeed hauled 3 SEALs out alive by nightfall, and in doing so, had proven once again that in the United States Navy, no one gets left behind.